life be easier if things were just black and white, either or, right or wrong, yes or no? But the more I grow, the more I learn, I realize that life is very rarely black and white. It's most often these shades of gray. Well, I sit down today with Kelsey Blahnik, and we have a great conversation about how do we live in the tension of the and, to realize that it's not either or, but there's this and in there. And the more we can embrace the and, it helps us in our relationships. It helps us with our own personal mental health and how we treat and think of ourselves, but it helps in the world too. So sit down and enjoy this episode of the Live Faith First podcast. My way or the highway. This is a black and white issue. Seems though the more we grow and mature, we realize that very little is black and white. Either or just doesn't work because it's often both and. But that can cause some struggles, internal struggles, external struggles, relational struggles. And as we navigate a complicated world, it just gets harder to do the black and white thing. So Kelsey Blahnik is here with us today to talk about the and way. So Kelsey, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, it is fun. I enjoyed reading your book, The And Way. And so I think this is going to be some great stuff for our listeners today. But before we get into all that, will you give us a cliff notes of your life? Where were you born? Where were you raised? How'd you get to where you are today?
Sure. Well, so I was actually born in Northern California and then pretty quickly in just a couple of years lived in Jersey for most of my childhood, then in Houston for all my adolescence, and then in Orlando for much of my adulthood until now moving to Austin 5 years ago. And so I have lived in all these coasts. I've lived in all these different parts of the country. And I think that's a big part of what led me to this work is I've lived in red places and blue places and purple places. And I've found good people in all of those places. And so I've had a lot of varied experiences. And I got to tell you, I'm not used to the cold, even though I lived in the cold for some of this time. I'm still meant to be in a warm place. I'm glad I landed in Austin, where most of the year we're nice and comfortable. And I decided to become a social worker when I was just 16. I've always been called to that profession and I've never looked back. I've always felt convicted this is the right place to be. And I went off to college in Florida and really enjoyed my profession doing more of a case management style work the first few years, working with a variety of populations, mainly with unhoused veterans, unhoused folks that needed emergency or long-term supportive housing, and then shifted into more of a clinical role about 8 years ago when I opened up my private practice. I had young kids and it made sense from a time commitment standpoint to be able to have flexibility and be more part-time and now full-time. And then we moved here to Austin and I have a virtual therapy practice now. And I've got 2 young kiddos, not so young now. They're like reaching 9 and 11. And we love living out here because we're all about the hiking and living in the hill country, getting to enjoy the beautiful landscape out here.
Yes. I've been kind of around Texas. I've never made it to the hill country. I actually been to Austin once, but like it was for a trade show and was just downtown the whole time. So I got to get out to Austin. I hear great things about it. And I have a current brother-in-law and a former brother-in-law who are both from there. So I don't know how it's been that I've never quite made it, to really enjoy Austin. So
I'll tell you, April and October are kind of my favorite times to recommend that people make it out here. That's like the best weather.
Okay.
And April, we've got all the beautiful wildflowers coming out too.
All right. I will do that. And even my sister lives in Houston. I told you this at the front, but even October in Houston's lovely. So if y'all want to like travel, my experience in Texas, like you say, April and also in October, those are the good months. So if you want to avoid hurricanes and, hot, or you have snow right now because
just don't come in August. That's all I ask. Right. If you want to like it here.
Right. Hey, so you wrote this book. It's titled The And Way. Now, would you just give us like a 10,000-foot overview, maybe just some handholds for people to grab on for the rest of our conversation? What is the And Way? Kind of set the framework for what we're going to be talking about here today.
Yes, the and way is a mindset that rejects this idea that we have to live in either or, that we have to live in two extremes. And we're often fed the choice of two extremes, two political parties, two ways of doing things, either right or wrong. And instead, embracing what would it look like if we gave ourselves more options in between? Could we allow ourselves to have more complexity within and look at other people as more complex, nuanced beings so that we didn't have that ease of writing someone off? We instead could still maintain relationships, maybe with different boundaries, different levels of boundaries. That didn't mean either I'm totally enmeshed with this person, I just agree with everything they say, or I allow them to treat me any which way, or I cut them off and I won't, even listen to their opinions.
Right. Okay. I love that. That is super good. Another term that you used is the clay mindset, CLAY, clay, like you played with in school, hopefully. What's the clay mindset? Can you give us kind of some ideas of what that term, because I think we'll probably be using that a little bit this today.
Yeah. So rather than sticking with the either or of being positive or negative, we can embrace the idea that sometimes certain protective instincts, for example, to become aggressive or to be more passive or to be positive or to be negative, those are appropriate in different instances. They're not only being positive, like that toxic positivity, not only being positive is necessary to abide by all the time. And obviously living in all negativity or only one way on another extreme is also going to cause harm. So we're trying to reject these extreme settings by saying, here's an option and here's another option. Another way that we use clay mindset is by looking at ourselves as not fixed in stone. We're not done. We are always evolving. We know from the neuroscience that's shown that our brains are continuing to evolve, which is so exciting that we can keep building more neural pathways and grow in our skill set. And that's what Dr. Carol Dweck discovered with the growth mindset. And so the same thing goes when we look to our brother and sister or anybody around us to say, you have the ability to change too. I'm not going to just write you off and assume that the way you've been is the way you're always going to be. Or if I approach you with this tough topic, I assume the way you're going to react. I could see the possibility that you can change, just like I know from building self-compassion that I can change.
Yeah, I love that. And it really is easy to get into the mindset that that's just how they are. They're just always going to be that way. And that can be tough because sometimes people don't want to change and maybe they will always be that way. And that's that's more on them. But how do we have grace with that? I'm going to call it that grumpy person, but that person, or how do we have a clay mindset? I'm sorry, I might use the word grace because those things really seem to coincide for me, kind of coming from that Christian perspective, is that it's having grace with ourselves and grace with others. So
absolutely,
let's use clay. How do we have that with somebody who we're like, dude, they are never going to change? Is it something for us? Is it something to address with them? How do we kind of live that out a little bit?
Yes. Well, I love the term grace because I think of grace as undeserved favor. And it's not that somebody deserves necessarily to keep giving them that opportunity to assume something different could happen, because maybe they've already proven to you over 10 times, 70 times, that they've done this, they've had the same reaction. And yet that undeserved favor is offering it again. And because as I hope people learn through this book, the first half is all about the internal work that we do, because we're also evolving and hopefully learning how to use some communication skills that can also set up the other person for maybe having a chance to do this differently than the many interactions you've had before with them. And then the other piece to answer that question that comes in for me is acceptance, of accepting I can keep doing all this internal work, and then I do still have to accept that it's not that the other person can't change, but there is the possibility they choose not to, or there is the possibility they don't have the skills yet, or there is the possibility that they do eventually, but not while I'm still in a relationship with them, or just not today. So I'm constantly in a state of acceptance that this other person has chosen not to repair or isn't ready for repair. Yeah.
And that's such a big deal. There's a number of, relationships in my life where I just kind of have to remind myself, like, I'm not going to get that from that person, or it might be different in a year, it might be different in 2 years, but right now they seem to be proving the same thing over and over. And every time I see them, I'm seeing the same thing. And I'm like, man, why are you, why are you doing this? And that could be really, really challenging. And especially, and I'm not talking about the terribly abusive relationships. Like that's a whole different something. We're talking about, I'm going to call it the more normal, you got an aunt or an uncle who won't stop talking about their candidate, or you have a friend who continues just to step into the same addiction habits or the same relational habits. You're like, it could be different. Do you have any things that kind of help you stick with that clay mindset, or reminders or something that like we can use triggers for ourselves, the positive kind of triggers to remind us like, hey, there's a different way to think about this? Do you have any kind of little tips for folks there?
Yes, I'm constantly reminding myself that a lot of these things are skill building. For the other person to be able to pause and respond differently rather than react the way they've always reacted, that takes practice and that takes skill building, and they may not have those skills yet. So I give myself that sense, like they may not have those skills yet. They may not have had that practice. I do the same thing when I'm thinking as a parent, when my kid does something that I'm like, how in the world did I just, that is not like you to behave that way. I just remind myself they need more practice at this thing. That doesn't mean that they're doomed to fail. It's that they need more practice at learning this skill. And I am constantly reminding myself that folks that grew up in all types of different homes with one or two parents that were either constantly meeting their needs or constantly withholding affection or constantly judging them or constantly blowing up, they haven't had the chance to do as much practice as somebody who grew up in a home where someone was meeting their needs and they were attuning to them, and they were practicing forgiveness and repair. And that means that their practice, their skill set is going to be very different from one home to the next.
Yeah. This is 15 years ago now, but in the church context, something happened. Somebody decided, they didn't want to be part of the church anymore, and they left. Not quite kicking stones, but they weren't real happy on their way out the door. And so a few months later, and the person had been a friend of mine, and we had connected a bunch over the previous years. And so I made a point to go to him and just say, hey man, I want to ask your forgiveness. I apologize that, it went down the way it went down. That is not how I would have wanted to happen. I really hope we can, keep a healthy relationship. And he said to me, you're the first person who has ever said, will you forgive me or apologize to me? And this is a grown man. This is a 30, 40, I forgot how old he was at the time, but he's at least in his 30s, maybe early 40s. And nobody had ever apologized to him. And so if you've never seen somebody apologize, then how do you expect to actually be an apologizer? And because kind of what I wanted out of that person was, I apologize for kicking stones out my way out the door, which I did not get, and I'm not bugged. But my point is like, in that case, I couldn't expect a reciprocal I apologize, because he's never even heard it in his life. And it kind of blew me away. But how do we do that compassionate imagination? That's what I call what you just said, that idea of they need more practice or something along that. How do we practice that compassionate imagination for people on a regular basis?
Well, I introduced this concept of parts language, which is from internal family systems, IFS, which you're probably learning about in psychology, that I have gained so much from, both personally and professionally, this whole, concept of parts language. Because when I'm able to see myself as, a series of younger versions of myself, and I have within me a bunch of different instincts that I want to rely on, maybe one extreme is wanting to go out, one extreme is wanting to stay in. And if I lean on either of those all the time, I'd have some issues on either end. And yet playing with both of those parts of me, the one that's really social and wants to go out and connect, and then the part of me that likes to retreat and reset, having a little bit of both of that in my life is really useful and is what kind of keeps things going for me. If I can look at somebody else as also having those competing impulses within them, that allows me to keep imagining a skill set that they could have with time. It's just that maybe their impulse to be, to shut down or to kick the rocks, as you gave that example, that impulse took over in that moment. It doesn't mean that they'll never have a maybe in another setting, maybe when they aren't activated in the same way, maybe when somebody apologizes for the first time for them, they don't have the same competing impulse, and they start to get to practice the talking about it and talking through a problem for the first time. And then that's when that develops. And maybe the next time then that they're hit with some sort of trigger, some sort of activation, they'll have the possibility of not just reacting with what they've always known, the throwing a big tantrum. They'll instead have that other option even available to them. That does take some time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That is good. I want to kind of go back to your and concept a little bit. And this is something that I'm just trying to learn myself, is like holding the both sides. And I'm going to give you two quick examples, and I want you to just talk. But, one is I'm a bad parent because I didn't go to my child's softball game today.
Mm-hmm.
When the reality is I spent an entire weekend at a softball tournament, or dance tournament or whatever it is for your child. And yet this particular Thursday, I have some meetings that I can't skip. And I want to tell myself I'm a bad parent. So kind of holding that, are you a bad parent? And the other is, and you can pick whichever one of these you want to talk about, is like holding competing emotions. Over the last number of months, had some really joyous, exciting, happy things happening. And so that just gives me joy. And at the very same time, we had a tragic loss of my brother-in-law very quickly, actually, this December. And so kind of, I remember taking a walk around the neighborhood and feeling tremendous joy because of just kind of some of the things that are happening in my life. And at the very same time, having this deep kind of, pain, mourning, sorrow because of my brother-in-law. How do we, and those are two very different examples. So you can choose the parent one or the emotional one, but like, how do we do the and like, what's our mindset supposed to be like as we kind of navigate some of those and things we experience?
Yeah. Well, something I touch on a lot and mention in the book is this micro and macro, on this very personal level. Sometimes it feels odd to consider the possibility that there's joy and pain happening at the same time. But when we zoom out on a macro level, when we look at what's happening in the world, maybe even we've faced a collective tragedy when someone's been hurt that many of us are familiar with, or when someone passes away that many of us are familiar with, or when we go through a natural disaster, anything that's a collective pain. There's still another part of the world where there's a celebration happening, or there's a wedding, or somebody's being born, or when you zoom out, throughout the course of history, we've always coexisted with joy and pain on the earth. And so it makes sense that there would be a version of that internally going on as well. I think you could pull that right into the example you gave about the parenting choice, because I think there's probably an internal conflict of emotion in the fact that you're missing the game. Like, a part of me feels either guilty or sad that I'm missing out on something, and maybe I'm feeling relieved because I'm getting this project done at work that I've really needed to get done that whole other weekend while I was away. So I could be feeling both relieved and sad at the same time. Or maybe you're missing it because you're getting to connect with someone. Well, I'm grateful that I'm having this other experience, and sad I'm missing out on that experience of being at the game. When it comes to establishing that comfort with being good enough, being satisfied enough with our role, and a parent is a perfect example, because we're never going to do it perfectly right, and we're going to find out from our kids one day all the things that we did, all the things we did that weren't perfectly satisfactory. I'm always holding both of, I am a good enough mom, and I messed up when I did blank blank. Maybe when I accidentally scheduled something over the time of that baseball game, or when I blew up, when I did get really reactive and it wasn't in line with the style of parenting that I ideally want to go for. And yet I'm a good enough parent because I'm not doing that all the time. I'm doing my best, or I've been able to give myself enough grace in that moment to say, I was pretty reactive because of something that happened earlier. So that's the phrase that I always come back to. It's not just I am a good parent or I'm a bad parent. I am a good enough parent, and still giving myself that opportunity to improve, or to have information to work with that makes my parenting a little better. And I could have handled this differently.
Yeah. It's good. And again, I'm probably going to keep coming back to grace, but it is trying to have grace with ourselves when we don't get it right, and we won't. And I joke, and I'm not really joking because now I'm paying, but like, I'll be like, hey, I got to throw another $100 in the counseling jar, right? Like, I know that this is going to be at least 2 sessions. That's more than $100. So I got to keep going. But, and I laugh because my daughter, I am paying for therapy for our child right now. Gratefully, she tells us not because tremendously amount because of our parenting. So I know we are not fully relieved because I've done numbskull things, and so have my wife. But anyway, so it's not easy being a parent, and it's 24/7. And there are times where you're gonna get it wrong. And I think one of the things that I've tried to do as a parent is I go back and apologize. Here I am, a second apology. I don't talk about apologies that often, but to go back and apologize to my kids, to our daughter, just say, hey, I got it wrong. I'm sorry.
I think that's critical when I'm working with adults, because I work with teens and up, 12 and up. And when I'm working with adults, the thing that I consistently see across the board, what people really long for from their parents is for the parent to witness and validate the pain that they went through when they were a child, or even an actual apology. Sometimes it's not that they really require the actual apology, but even to just acknowledge, yeah, you were harmed in that. They could still hold the idea, well, it's because I was really stressed and I had lost my job and we had been going through a divorce. There are tons of ways that they could defend or be defensive and try and push back on justifying it. And instead, when a parent's able to acknowledge, yeah, that must have been hard for you, that's the majority of what most people need to hear.
Yeah.
To repair.
Yeah. That's so important. And it's something that, I'm trying to learn, just that how do we, the power of acknowledgement. That's what I'm trying to learn. Just the power of acknowledging. And I think it is challenging when it can be directed at you, when you're the parent in the situation that your child went through that either at your hand or just while they were growing up. But that acknowledgement that that must have been really, really hard. And I am sorry that you had to go through that. And and stop trying to defend yourself with the but I was and all of this, because I think when we do that, we make it about ourselves when the reality of the pain is residing in somebody else. And so, but it's hard to try to not to try to defend yourself, right? Because like, oh man, I was really doing my best. But anyway, the power of just acknowledging. Right.
Yes.
Right.
And when you mentioned you keep saying grace, it's because it's so necessary to be able to do it both directions, because and this is just research based. Dr. Kristen Neff's research shows that self-compassion is the root of being able to also express compassion towards someone else. So I think the more that we practice that acknowledgement exercise with ourselves, it makes sense that I reacted that way. It makes sense that I sometimes feel this way. It makes sense that then the easier that flows toward our child or toward another person to go, it makes sense you felt that way instead of feeling like we're having to justify.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to kind of change gears a little bit here. I want to talk about peacemaking versus peacekeeping. And I'm taking this as your quote because it was in your book, but you said peace exists in the absence of violence. And I really appreciated that short sentence. I don't think that was attributed to anybody else, right? That was, is that your quote?
That is part of it, in that it exists in the absence of violence, and it also exists in the presence of justice, in that there is meant to be conflict. We're moving the model that I'm using in the Ann Way, this harm reductionist stance, is we're moving towards an absence of violence, but not an absence of conflict.
Yes.
And that part's critical to me.
Keep going. I want to hear more about that. That's exactly where I want to go. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Conflict is still so necessary for us to be able to treat one another with dignity, and to be able to recognize when we're out of line, or to be able to have a sense of intimacy in our relationships and not just coexist with each other, but to actually have depth in relationship. We have to be able to have conflict so we can have accountability, and then we can feel understood by one another.
Yeah, I love that. So let's just start. Okay, never mind. I'm going to go back. Can Can we talk? I want to talk quickly about passivity and assertive communication. And I'm going to link those two. I'm not sure you necessarily did, but like, talk about passivity. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about passivity and like why that's not a great stance for most of us to hold. I'm going to say a majority of the time, because I think there are times where you're like, let me just step back a little bit. But
Yes,
talk
I'm
about
so glad you
passivity.
said that. I do think that there are times when it's necessary because sometimes it's a survival skill that people need to use. You're not going to use the same response to your boss or to, a family member that you see one time a year versus somebody that you want to continue to deepen your relationship with. There's going to be more opportunities for assertive communication, for really, sharing your perspective on something potentially controversial or difficult to talk about when you have some mutual investment in a relationship. So I'm glad you prefaced that there are times passivity makes sense, but passivity really comes down to shove it under a rug, put on a smile, pretend it's not there, let's move on, agree to disagree. Some of those skills that I think I was definitely encouraged, especially as a woman, to lean into over the course of time, and in order to have relationships. Sometimes we get the message that the way you do that is by pretending, and I've fully rejected that idea that that's the opportunity to deepen a relationship, because I've seen it firsthand and I've seen it in my clients' lives. And it is so cool to see that assertive communication has led to more clarity in our relationships, and it's led to more depth, because I'm not ever assuming and trying to guess what the other person thinks, and vice versa. My friend doesn't have to wonder if I was upset about something, because we've already built transparency and a sense of trust that they know if I wasn't cool with them, if I wasn't okay with whatever happened, that I would have addressed it with them. It would have already come up.
Yeah. Yeah. That is awesome. Now, if you grew up kind of with that passivity, seen but not heard, kind of some of those things, let's just keep the peace here. What's maybe one or two things somebody can do to like move in? I feel like the people who have leaned into passivity have a really hard time with assertiveness, because and maybe it's just me, but it doesn't come out always in kind of this way that can be received. I don't know if it's because it's just volcano explosion when it finally comes out. But can you talk a little bit about if you lean into passivity, how do you start moving towards assertive communication?
Yes, I love that you mentioned that volcano, because I do see that all the time, that a lot of folks have experienced that instant pot. This is the metaphor that I always get, that instant pot experience where they've kept the pressure inside for so long that when they finally take the lid off, it's an explosion, instead of letting things vent a little bit over the course of time. So we want to vent the air out. And so I like the idea of not just suddenly barking our orders of what we need to have happen, but to learn this skill set. Like I think of flexing muscles. Like you don't start with 100 pounds at the gym. You start with 3 and then 8 and then 10, you move up. So flexing those assertive muscles a little bit at a time. And assertive communication really sticks with two things: I feel and I want. And so the I feel, I think culturally, we've gotten a lot better at the I feel. We've gotten a lot of our, emotional psychology speak out in TikTok and out in the world. A lot of people are doing a lot of therapy. And I think as a society, we've overcorrected a little bit with the I want, by just putting out sometimes the complaint, this is what you shouldn't have done, instead of putting out an I want with, this is what I need to see in order to repair. This is what I need to see in order for things to improve in our relationship. So the place to start, to me, especially if you've already practiced the I feel piece, like a lot of us have, I think we really need to start with developing a sense of, what do I want? What in any given moment? And this can actually start super, super small with just, what do I want to eat? Where do I want to go? And somebody asks me which restaurant we go to, or where we should go for our, girls' night out, or when my kid is crawling all over me and I don't feel comfortable with it, saying that I don't want that right now. Or, when we're deciding if it's time to go out or stay in, and I say, man, what I really want is some time to recharge at home. So being able to practice the wants is critical. And maybe you start with just noticing them internally. And then the next step would be being able to actually explicitly ask for them, request them to the people that you're safest with, that you feel the most comfortable with. And then once you get really comfortable doing that, practicing this in a more higher conflict, setting. But I don't think that comes super easily. The high conflict moments we're way more tense. It's easier to be more reactive. And if your natural reaction, that protective instinct, is to be passive, it's going to be really hard to just call in assertive communication out of nowhere. So it does start with building those muscles, flexing those muscles for a while.
Yeah. I love that. And I think a great example that you gave is the choosing the restaurant, because most of the time, hey, what do you want to eat tonight? Actually, I don't care is a legitimate response. Like, I don't feel like, sushi tonight. I'm kind of feeling like Mexican or Italian or, anyway, but it's a great place to practice, because there probably is something you don't feel like, and there probably is something you would prefer to eat. And so even if you can go through the process in your mind, and even if you really didn't care, if it was really like, I don't care if it's burgers or, whatever, just the fact that you put yourself in a place to make a decision, to maybe start being assertive, not demanding, but assertive, and like, yeah, you know what? I actually do feel like, Mexican food tonight. Do you mind if we do that instead of? And that's a low, low hanging fruit, but that's an easy lift, right? You're not really getting into the emotional around. And if you are getting emotional around it, there's probably a lot underneath that needs to be uncovered as to why are you having that emotional response.
Yes. And so when we say whatever you want, the other thing that's important to recognize is we're actually putting that work on the other person to make the decision, and to then they're being vulnerable by risking, well, if they pick a restaurant that stinks, then it's kind of on them, as opposed to when you participate in the decision making, you're both taking some responsibility in a collective decision. And so that can also benefit the relationship in that way. It's putting less on the person that's willing to be vulnerable and assertive.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. I'm going to keep going with this peacemaking versus peacekeeping. And we've talked a little bit just in relationship, and I'm picturing this in a close, marriage or committed relationship type of thing. But let's move it outside of that a little bit. What does it look like at the Thanksgiving, Christmas dinner table? Aunt, whatever is there, or maybe it's your parent, maybe, whatever it is, your cousin. What does that look like as far as, let's just step straight into politics. Somebody spouting off about their political, their candidate or their party. What is peacemaking versus peacekeeping? What can it look like in that kind of space?
Yes. This is such a good example, because I think we enter the holiday season every year and folks go, what do I do if this happens? What do I do if that happens? And that's exactly why, as I mentioned, that whole first half that you read of the book, that I address, how do we do the groundwork? How do we lay the groundwork so that we can have kind of the intuition and enough conviction in the moment of which way we should take this? Because there are instances if somebody says something so egregious that needs, something spouting off some information that could truly confuse people because it is so false that it may warrant I actually say something at the dinner table. I would say most of the time, at the dinner table on the one holiday of the year where you all get together, that's not necessarily the time to then still address the topic. It's an opportunity. It's kind of the seed that's planted, even that I've stayed grounded in this moment. I use some of my tools to be able to stay in my sense of self, of still having compassion for this person. They're practicing, right? They're still learning. Or we look at things very differently than one another. Their competing impulses say that they feel very comfortable being, really loud and brazen in this moment. And my competing impulses are still charged, and realizing passivity is okay in this moment. Or maybe just a simple assertive statement like, I would love to talk to you later on about this. So there are a few options, just totally staying quiet and bringing it back up later. Assertive could look like, I'd love to talk to you about this later. Or assertive could say, I just really don't think that that's true, Aunt May. I'm really surprised to hear you say that, because my experience has been blank. Or, I feel heartbroken to hear you talk about people that way that are very special to me, or to hear you talk about people that way, period. And so there are ways that, rather than getting as big and shaming as we can get in a more aggressive stance, that it probably invites a more fruitful conversation. And ideally, I think in those situations, the most productive time is probably going to be one-on-one or in a smaller setting after the fact. And maybe once you've had a little time to reflect on how you want to
Process
proceed.
a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
And notice that Kelsey didn't start off with "you're an idiot" or "what kind of human would believe that." Like, it's not these, ad hominem. You're not arguing about the character of the person. And I think that's a big piece that you bring up, where we love these, again, back to the either or, but like, let me label that person as. And as soon as I label them as a Democrat, a Republican, a whatever, you pick all the labels out there, we tend to just then be able to push that person away and just say, oh, they're with all of those deplorables, or they're on my team. How do we avoid kind of those big global statements that, like, that person is nothing but a political opinion? How do we kind of dive in a little bit deeper in our own thinking about people?
Yes, I've continued to work on this with myself, and I will continue to have to, because I'm going to continue to be in a society that loves labeling other people. And so as much as I still try this, it doesn't mean it doesn't come up in my brain. But when I do notice it, I try and check myself internally first with, this black and white. I still have a black and white thinking part of me. One of my instincts is to put people in categories. And that's an instinct that I have biologically that makes a lot of sense, because I'm trying to keep myself safe. So that black and white part of me comes up and tries to put Aunt May in a category that says she's bad, she's racist, she's negative, whatever. She's in that extreme negative category. And instead, when I challenge that with a part of me, this black and white part of me thinks that about her. And in self, I also know blank, blank, blank about her. So in self, I know she just brought my kids the sweetest little Christmas gift. She just, said something. She just brought her neighbor a meal last week when they had surgery. I'm holding both of these pictures of this same person at the same time. And that has opened up compassion in me, the same way that I've practiced it internally, recognizing I'm the same parent that missed the game as I am the parent that held her hand last night. And so when I'm able to do that both directions, there's a lot more opportunities for productive conversation.
Yeah. I'll use the term that I'm using today is, but compassionate imagination, right? Like, let's dig in a little bit deeper about what else do I know about that person? What other indicators that I have about their character or their beliefs or their thoughts? And I thought one of the examples you gave that hit me was, so-and-so loves the environment and loves recycling, but they don't recycle because they don't believe there's great outcomes out of their own, the garbage company in their own city. And that totally resonates, because I love recycling. I want everything, I'm also very categorized and organized and all of that stuff. But I question, like, really, is what I'm putting in here, is this actually going to change my environmental impact because of the things that I'm purchasing? And so and I still recycle, y'all, even if I don't know what happens at the garbage company. But so even that idea that sometimes a person's character is one way and they choose to make a decision that you might say is against maybe their convictions.
Yes, we call those trade-offs. We are just constantly living in trade-offs. We have ideals. I call one of them that I talk about as the protective paradox of knowing my ideal is that I'm living in peace, as in a world without violence, moving toward at least my experience in the world, not leaning into violence. And yet I understand that if I were defending myself, there's this paradox of how am I going to defend? How is my protective instinct going to actually operate in that moment when I'm left with fewer decisions, fewer options, because we're in systems that are out of our control. And so when I look at the recycling options, for example, or the ways that we get our food, let's go there. I am all about reducing plastics as much as possible for the sake of our environment, for the sake of me being totally crunchy and wanting to take care of my body. And yet I bring home probably 50% of my food, if not more, is in plastic containers, even from Whole Foods, right? So we're constantly making trade-offs. It's like, oh, here's this organic, all grass-fed, blah, 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 in plastic.
Styrofoam, the whole thing, right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, if we ship it, then forget it. There's like all these other layers to it. So trade-offs all the
Yeah.
time. And that's
Yeah.
where the self-righteousness can get so tricky in
Thank you.
these conversations, because I can feel so superior to Aunt May in that moment when I think I would never say that. And yet I recognize there are trade-offs where, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I may have had a different stance on that, or I may have, I've caught her in this moment at this time with the information that she's working with the trade-off that she's making in this moment, to feel like she's somehow maybe protecting herself by having this stance. And it's coming back to kind of, who am I to judge? Why am I seeing, the fleck in someone else's eye when I have a log in my own eye? Because
right.
I have all this inner conflict going on too.
Yeah. And it really is fun to throw stones at other people. I think that's part of this too. We're like, oh no, they're deplorable. They're bad. They don't have it figured out. And that kind of then puts us in this, self-righteous, Pharisaical, I can look down on that person role. And I think what I keep hearing over and over though is we have to be introspective and admit the areas where we're doing the exact same thing they're doing. It's a different genre. It's in a different area, but we're doing the trade-off too. We're all doing that. And Aunt May's might be, particularly offensive to us. But what I'm doing, I guarantee is particularly offensive to somebody else, but that's still a trade-off that I'm able to live with, that I'm willing to accept. And so having that introspection is so important. Do you have anything that helps us with introspection? Is there, it seems like a lifelong habit you got to cultivate, but do you have any idea or thoughts on where we kind of start with some of those processes?
The most basic being that I'm constantly trying to put that and in between these two opposing parts of me. So if I'm, instead of pointing a finger at someone and calling them a hypocrite, I wonder, if I put my finger back the other direction, how do I see that there is quote unquote hypocrisy and what I call inner conflict that's naturally living within me? So there's this part of me that wants to operate this way, and there's a part of me that wants to operate this way. For example, every time that I'm activated in a controversial conversation, there's a part of me that wants to just condescend towards someone and be like, how could you think that way? And instead, I have this opposing part and in self that's saying, I know compassion is what I want to lead with. I know that that's more in line with my values. I would rather leave this conversation not having necessarily changed their mind, and to feel like I was still in line with my values. And so that's what I'm going to lead with. So I just do that internal practice of, this part of me says this and this part of me says that. And then I recognize which is actually more in line with my values. And I want to lead with that.
Lean into that. That's good. That's good. Kind of along these same lines, talk about the importance of stepping into those hard conversations. I call it stepping into the suck. Like this stinks. This sucks. I can't believe I have to step. But it can be anything from hard conversations or painful memories or areas where we anticipate conflict. I mean, there's so many that I'm kind of speaking of the tough stuff globally here. What's the importance of us stepping into those spaces, personally, relationally, kind of even maybe culturally, because we really like convenience. We really like comfort. So why do we want to do, what's important about us doing that?
We really do. I think that's a huge driver in this division that we have as a culture right now, is that instant gratification is such a big part of our society now. We're so used to doing the easy thing, and we need to, coming back to the term practice, we need to practice being uncomfortable enough to where it does flow more naturally. Right now, we're stepping back as quickly as we can when there's something controversial that could, even saying like, let's just write off XYZ conversation or topics in a conversation altogether, because it could get dicey, it could get uncomfortable. And instead, leaning into the opportunities that we have with that, the answer to that to me is, we have more depth and intimacy as a result of being uncomfortable, and we have more opportunities for growth. So that's on a community level. On an individual level, I mean, the research is clear. When we are uncomfortable, that leads to growth. And we know that from going to the gym. We know that from having played on sports teams. We know that from, if you've ever done one of those challenge courses, think of how much more connected you feel to people at the end of a challenge course, or how much more capable you feel at the end of a race, because you're going, I pushed through that and I got to the other side. And then the next time you feel less, it's less daunting, and you feel more capable from the start rather than at the end. So I think the more we practice having uncomfortable conversations, the more it will flow into our daily lives. And then this conflict won't be something that's totally off, over here is something we want to avoid. It'll be something that's a natural part of evolving ourselves and our relationships.
Yeah, that's good. You talk a little bit about exposure response therapy.
Yes.
Is that what this is? Is that kind of as we step into? Would you talk a little bit about exposure response therapy and some of the benefits of that?
Yes. So the evidence-based practice that we use in addressing specifically anxiety and OCD, which are the OCD and trauma is the main area of my therapy practice. The most evidence-based treatment for that is exposure and response prevention, where you are slowly encouraged to address the thing that you're most fearful of, the worst case scenario, and watch it play out, and allow yourself to sit with that more and more often. If you're in a session, for example, you're more considering what that would look like in life, in between your therapy session. It may be confronting the person and not necessarily getting reassurance that, are we good? Just being able to experience conflict and know that this is part of being in a healthy relationship. Or it could look like, going around people that don't believe the same things as you and experiencing the discomfort that comes with that. Or it could look like being exposed to news and reading the articles that are from different opinions than what you're comfortable with, stepping outside of that echo chamber. It could look like, if you're really afraid of flying, that's imagining what it's like to be on the airplane, and then eventually actually going on the airplane, doing the scary thing, as opposed to avoiding any flights. So it's really leaning into things that scare you. And ultimately, the way that we're driven toward those things in a way that feels healthy and not just, reckless, not just for the sake of the fact that it scares you, is that we're doing that when it's in line with your values. So if I, for example, really value novelty and adventure, and I'm afraid to fly, that's not going to align very well with the lifestyle that I'm really after. If I'm craving going on a trip and flights are getting in the way of that, then I want to put myself through some discomfort so I can reach that end. And then if I'm craving community, which we as human beings are craving connection naturally, then I know that having conflict is an inevitable part of that I'm going to have to face in order to be driven toward that value.
Yeah. That is so good. So basically the grid for if we should go through the pain has to do with, does it align with kind of who we want to be and what our goals are and kind of who we want to become? Not, like you say, I love that. Not just for the sake of being afraid. That's not what it is. One of my granddaughters is terribly afraid of spiders. Like if she sees a spider, it's like, run away, find somebody to take care of the spider. And I'm thinking, this type of thing could be, because spiders exist in our homes and in our workplaces and so on. This might get in the way of your productivity. So,
exactly.
Maybe it's something you should, figure out how to get yourself exposed and anyway, work through that. So, all right, I'm going to pick up two more subjects as we kind of wind down here. And these are just kind of, I've not random, they're in your book, but you talk about sleep. I don't know if anybody on any of the other podcasts talk about sleep. I'm just obsessed with it, not only because I like to sleep, but there's a tremendous amount of health benefits. Would you talk a little bit about sleep and how this is actually good for our mental health, physical health, and some of those things?
Yes. Well, I'm glad you brought up in general that we're coming down to the idea of our nervous systems, our bodies are critical in this work. And that's why as many books and conversations are out there about how you have the tough conversations or how you address tough topics, we have to start with the internal work. And some of that is on a biological level of how do we take care of our physical beings with our nutrition and our, movement and our sleep, as some of the core pillars of that. And it's so important that we're well rested, because all of us know we're more on edge when we don't have the we're not going to probably react in the same way. And that's just a nervous system thing. It's not just because we're being grumpy and picky. It's that our bodies aren't prepared for an attack in the same way when we're rested, when we're well rested, or when we're not. And so if you think about, that's how our brains are interpreting threats, even in conversation and in the possibility of being rejected or the possibility of being shamed by another person in these controversial conversations, we're going to perceive that as threat. And just like if we were under attack physically, our bodies want to make sure they're well rested to prepare for something tough like that. So I think getting solid sleep and proper nutrition, all this is critical.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And it is. I mean, we talk about being hangry. So, I mean, right. I mean, that's my reality. Just the other day, when I was like, why are you looking at me that way? I'm like, I just need to go get a bite to eat. My face will change significantly if I just get a little something in my body. And yeah, sleep. I mean, I think of some of the, behavior that aligned the least with who I want to be as a dad, as a husband, as all of the things that I am. And
Yes.
often it's when I'm been low on sleep, and when I working in the church world, occasionally you'd work through weekends. And so I knew that if I was doing like a Monday through a double weekend, through a weekend and through the next week, like, we should not have any significant conversations by the time I get to that second Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Like those 3 days, it's just too many days of work for me. Like, and I would know that. And so if I could, I would add a little rest in there to break that up. But sometimes it wasn't possible. And then you're like, Elliot, watch yourself. You're getting to day 8, to day 9, to day 10. And those would just end up being, more challenging for me to just kind of be the person that I wanted to be. And a lot of it was just, overwork and lack of sleep and lack of rest and some of those things. And so, if we want to be at our best, we got to give our body the fuel that it needs to be at its best.
And to be able to sleep, get solid, restful, restorative sleep, we need to have the right nutrition in terms of, even supplement wise, like getting lab work done and seeing where am I at if I'm not able to sleep and actually feel rested in the next morning. So that's why when I have an intake of a new client, we actually start with we always rule out medical first. So I refer someone to primary care and get blood work done. Because there's only so much, like that first half of my book, there's only so much that can really do if you are not well rested. If your nervous system is still completely off and you're, physiologically depleted and you don't have what you need on a basic human functioning level to proceed, it's going to be really hard to take in new skills for your brain to actually adapt and learn new things.
Yeah. All right, y'all. So let's eat some healthy food. Get your salads, your veggies. Avoid the fried foods if you can. Correct. That's that and ice cream are probably my two. I love ice cream. I love my French fries. I love ice cream. It's this is back in November. So whenever our daughter comes home from college, I'll usually say, "Hey, what do you want from the grocery store?" And ice cream is always on the list, somewhere between Cheetos, ramen, and, whatever she wants me to cook her, and then ice cream. And so went to the grocery store about a week before she was supposed to be home and bought 3. They're bigger than a pint. So I guess it's a quart. It's not a half gallon. So it's probably a quart. Bought 3 of those. We have this ice cream company called Y'all Got Bluebell, which is amazing.
I'm not partial to Bluebell, honestly. I want to hear what yours is.
So Northern California is called Mary Ann's, and it's a small ice cream place out of Santa Cruz. And over the last number of years, they've started to circulate it a little bit out of Santa Cruz. And so I live about 30, 40 minutes from there. And they just have, it's the same, the incredible flavors, the right ratios. Like I had what was it? Some toffee crunch something, but there was toffee crunch in every bite, and it wasn't too much. It wasn't too little. I mean, it's just perfect. Right. So
just right.
I bought a banana fudge, which I don't buy banana ice cream. That's not my jam. I mean, I like bananas, but that's not my go-to ice cream. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I'm like, oh, it's Mary Ann's. Let's give it a go. So about three quarts. For when my daughter was coming home a week later. By the time she came home, they were all gone. I guess I got to go back to the grocery store and get more. So she never had the banana fudge ice cream at all. So Anyway,
I hope she
and
gave you some
aside
grace
to,
for that.
and aside to, I try to keep my ice cream to the weekends, Monday through Thursday, no ice cream, but Friday, Saturday, watch out. So,
Have you had
um,
McConnell's? That I tried it in
no.
California, and I don't know if that's just it's in Davis, like or
Okay.
outside of Sacramento. That's where I tried McConnell's, and that was phenomenal.
Was it?
Yeah, they
Okay.
have this salted peanut butter fleck situation. It's delicious.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, check
I'll be
that one
looking
out.
that up.
I'm an ice cream
Now I
girl
have an
too.
excuse to go that direction. I will make sure to drive through Davis and get some of that. So,
There you go.
all right. I got one last question. Actually, I got two last questions, but this is kind of winding it down. What's one anchor for somebody to grab onto that's working through unpredictability, uncertainty, challenging relationships? What's one tool that you're like, hey, this is a good one that most of us can grab onto and implement fairly quickly?
Yeah. I go straight to change and acceptance. And so being able to look at what is in my control and what is out of my control is the simplest way of putting that. So I can create change in the world through what is actually in my control. So how I'm going to operate toward my children, my family members, my community, the institution I'm a part of. And then the part that I have to accept, the acceptance practice is, the way this system is that's being led by people outside of me, that's out of my control. And so I'm not throwing my hands up in resignation. That's not the same thing. This isn't giving up. It's saying I'm going to keep putting my energy into the stuff I can change. So some of those statements look like, I'm living day in and day out with this vision and mission of peace in the world. And I know that America's not there yet. I know that not everybody else is in agreement, or that, that on a state level, country level, world level, that everybody is not invested in this the same way as I am. So I don't expect to go around with everyone receiving this the same way as what I hope.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I love that. All right. This is my final question. What's one thing that's exciting you right now? It could be in your home, with your kids. It could be something you've been reading lately, an activity you're about to do. But what's one thing when you think about it, just puts a smile on your face?
Well, I love the Olympics. I'm really looking forward to the ice skating in the Olympics. So that's probably when I first think of, and I loved that just recently we put our names down for the Summer Olympics. USA Gymnastics is my favorite sport. Watching NCAA, watching any of the big competitions, even going when we can, but I've never gotten to see them in person. So I put our names down to hopefully get actual tickets for LA in 2028. That's going on right now. I don't know if it's over by this point, but to get to see the ice skating here pretty soon on television will be great. And then hopefully we'll find out one day we actually got tickets to see gymnastics.
So cool.
How about you?
Yeah, well, now that you bring it up, I love the Olympics, and I've never been. So, maybe I got to go see if I can get down to LA. Yeah. What's one thing that's exciting me? So just been a lot of change over the last number of months. Get to keep doing this podcast, which is super fun, but I just started a new role where we're bringing churches together to really just do Bible studies in transitional housing facilities for people coming out of homelessness. Mm-hmm. And so just really excited to be building this, and where, there's all kinds of pieces around it. And it's just exciting to see how God is just like brought so many resources together and people together. So I'm really excited to see how all of this plays out over the next, years. But excited to be stepping into an area that has always been a concern. I mean, you look around our big cities and there's people sleeping under bridges. And if you believe that these are all image bearers of God, sleeping out in the rain and the cold and all of that. And I know there's all kinds of nuance around it. So please, y'all don't, I'm not thinking this is simple. On the other hand, I think it's something that it's one place that there's a pretty good need in many U.S. large cities. Yes. And so to be able to kind of step into that and with Jesus and with the permission of these facilities that house people moving out of homelessness is pretty awesome. So that's probably it. I probably should have said something about my wife or daughter, but that's the biggest thing right now that comes to mind. So
very cool. That's exciting.
Yeah. So thanks for asking that question. I've never had anybody give it back to me again. So there's a social worker therapist at work asking questions. I love it. I love it. So, well, Kelsey, thank you so much. Where can people find your book? Do you want to just kind of give a quick plug on your book and where people can find that?
Yes. So you can go to theandwaypress.com, theandwaypress.com, or you can find it on Amazon if you look up The And Way, Assertive Peacemaking in a Divided World by Kelsey Blahnik. And you can also find my therapy practice at theandwaytherapy.com.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And for everybody out there today, let's go live faith first. Hey, you're still here. That means you enjoyed that conversation with Kelsey. Wasn't that a fun conversation? I just love that. So good. Okay, here's the one thing. I'd love you to put it down in the comments below. What's one thing you can do to have a compassionate imagination where you can just choose to imagine the best? Now, they may prove you wrong down the road, but maybe doing that will help you navigate that relationship, that conversation just a little bit better. So let's work on our compassionate imagination. And everybody, let's go live faith first.